happened, people stared. Some people, when I walked past them, they'd do this. Like, they'd literally go like this. Some people would scream a little bit, not like in a really hostile, frightened way, but like, oh my god, like, I found it funny. The hardest part was keeping a straight face. Hello, I'm Janine. I am the founder of Janine'sJourneys.com. So a common question that people often ask me is, what is it like traveling overseas as a person of colour, particularly in Asia? Because that's a place that I write about a lot, because I've been to more than 10 countries in Asia. And people often say, what is it like travelling as a black person abroad? What kind of reactions do you get? Indeed, before I went travelling, my family asked the exact same question. What is it like? Are you sure it's going to be safe? And all that jazz. And again, I think some of that fear, I say again because I've mentioned it in previous videos, I think some of that fear comes from the unknown, uncertainty. If you're not familiar with something, if you've never been somewhere, then you don't know how you're going to be perceived, or especially as we hear so much in the media, and if you're a person of colour you probably experience it as well, a lot of racism, and maybe people who haven't been through what you've been through sometimes kind of dismiss that, and they're like, oh no, you're just sort of imagining it basically. But it's real, and so it's natural for people to ask, what is it like travelling overseas as a black person of colour? Well, in Asia, particularly, the reactions varied, because to some extent, the reaction you get will depend on the country you've been to, the part of the country you go to, how familiar people are with seeing black faces, and, on the individual itself. Well, I can tell you about my experiences in China and Vietnam. So when I went to Tibet, first time I went to Tibet, honestly, it was like the Matrix. It was. I remember I went to the mall to pick up a can of oxygen. Yes, a can of oxygen. Tibet has quite it's quite high up in elevation, more than 3,000 meters, and you need oxygen. Especially when you get altitude sickness like I did. You need to breathe. Yeah, it's important. And everybody was staring at me. Everybody. The same happened when I went to Vietnam. Mainland China, again, the same thing happened. People stared. Some people, when I walked past them, they'd do this. Like, they'd literally go like this. Some people would scream a little bit, not like in a really hostile, frightened way, but like, oh my god, like, I found it funny. The hardest part was keeping a straight face. And it didn't come from a bad place. It really didn't. There were one or two individuals who, they kind of made me wonder a bit. They'd come up to you and take a photo without your permission and stuff. But generally it didn't come from a bad place. Most of the time people, when they saw you, they would smile. They would be like, and they'd smile, and they'd want to talk to you, and they'd want to find out about you. I had people randomly coming up and shaking my hands. It was great. People touching my hair. Now, some black women get really, really irate about that. Like, don't touch my hair, keep away kind of thing. And it can get a bit irritating, it can. But, to me it was just part of the experience, and my hair is pretty weird to some people, so I get it, I do. And it's not that people don't ever see images of black people. I saw a few, not many, but a few images of black people in China, depending on the store, or a poster or whatever. But I always put it like this: you see a dinosaur on TV, right? But how would you react if one walked past you on the street? Because, and I'm not saying black people are like dinosaurs, please don't get offended if you are black, like, just we're not dinosaurs, but you get my meaning. People are fascinated. I found a lot of fascination. And it's not to say that, there was no racism, as in racism doesn't exist in Asia. Of course it does. I write a lot of blogs about, the kind of challenges you may face. For example, if you are applying to be a black TFL teacher in China. But I found it very safe. And generally, the racism you do face is more kind of ignorance, almost this childlike racism. Like one person put it to me, who was white actually, but he was saying to me, oh, like sometimes Chinese people say, I don't like black people because they're African and Africans are stupid because you don't see them educated on television. That kind of very simple, simplistic way. But that's not the vibe that I got as a tourist to these countries. I sort of got, like I went to a lot of countries and a lot of rural villages where they just weren't used to seeing people like me, and I didn't get like this hostility that's like, what are you doing here? I just kind of got fascination, and people looked happy to see me, like happy that this foreigner is visiting their country and experiencing it. And then there were other countries, like Japan, for example, and South Korea, where people didn't really stare much at all. People would often compliment me on my hair. Nobody would really try to touch it. I've watched rather some YouTube videos where black people said, they'd sit down on a train and then people move away from them in Japan, but I didn't really get that. People were generally quite friendly, very helpful. There was a lot of times, for example, in South Korea and Japan, where I'd ask somebody for directions, and they'd point blank to say, come with me, and they'd give me a lift there. It's probably not the safest, but actually I felt very safe, and I'll do a whole blog about that, like the do's and don'ts and stuff while travelling. But the point is, people were friendly and helpful. In South Korea, I'd often get lost a lot. But people would always come up to me and say, hey, do you need help? Can I help you somehow? So that's the vibe that I got. In Vietnam, I noticed it was kind of like China, in that people would stare and stuff like that. And again, I didn't face any hostility or, unfriendliness. So I'd say if you're thinking of going to Asia but you're not sure what kind of reaction you'd get, just do it. There was one conversation I was having with an elderly white gentleman. This was in Tibet, and he said 20 years ago people weren't used to seeing white people, and actually in many parts of China they're still not. And people would want to take photos and stuff. They still do in parts of China and Tibet. But I definitely got the lion's share of attention. I was with a group, I was the only black person in the group, and occasionally people would take a photo of the other foreigners, but really a lot of eyes were on me. That the other tourists who were with me actually joked, hey Janine, you take the attention off of us. And yeah, that was definitely an experience. I was a bit disorientated at first, when you're not sure what's going on, and when you're new to something, it's a bit like, what's going on here kind of thing. But I got used to it, and I started to enjoy how friendly people were. Like a lot of monks would want to take photos of me, but I'd want to take photos of them, you see, because they were fascinating to me. And because they would be the first to say, oh, can I take a picture? Can I take a picture? It gave me a very easy, because I'm shy, When it comes to asking people whether I can take pictures, and I always ask first, out of respect, it's easy to ask when they're asking you, and it led to quite a lot of positive and hilarious exchanges. So I would say if you're thinking of going to Asia, in particular I'm talking about, I'm not sure about Eastern Europe or parts of the world I haven't been, but certainly in Asia, just do it. People may stare depending on where you go. People might want to take pictures of you, and it will get overwhelming at times. But don't let it stop you, because there's a whole world out there, and it's fascinating. It will be a trip you won't forget, I promise you. Just before ending this video, a little anecdote here. 10 years ago I went to Jamaica with my family. My mum brought me some lovely local Jamaican clothes to wear, started blending. I'm like, what do you mean blending? Most of my family's Jamaican, of course I'm gonna blend in. And people stared. I'm not joking. Like, I'd walk down the streets or some of the local areas and explore with my cousin. People stared. They didn't stare at my mum. She's English, but she grew up in Jamaica for some of her childhood. People would stare at me. My God, they would stare. Not in a hostile way, obviously, just in a curious way. And I said to my mum, how can they tell I'm a foreigner? Because I was even wearing local clothes, and I'm black, I'm half Jamaican. No, people knew I wasn't from there. Just something to think about. It's not, people often think if people are staring and taking photos, it must be racism or it must be something about you that they don't like. Not necessarily, because I just get stared at. Maybe I've just got one of those faces. I don't get that in England though. So if you're from America or you're from another part of the world and you're like, what's it like for black people in England? That's okay. Nobody will stare at you. Well, most people won't unless they're a total weirdo. You'll be fine in England. I get no attention. Oh, the other thing that happened when I was in China and mainland and Tibet, people would often shout out things like beautiful. I've never been called that before. People go, beautiful, beautiful. I don't get that in England. Makes me sad. But, yeah, so it wasn't hostile. People react to you with fascination. There are parts of the world you go, like, if you stick to some of the main places in France and Spain and places like that, you won't get any significantly terrible reaction, as long as you don't go to the rough parts or the parts that are known for that kind of thing, like everywhere really. But if you're black and you're wondering, should I go to Asia, will people accept me? Go, honestly. Don't let fear of anything, fear of solo travel, fear of racism, fear of general dangerness, is that a word, dangerness? No, I don't think so, stop you. Don't let fear hold you back, because the most amazing things that you can do in your life are scary. It's just the way it is. I hope this has been useful. But in any case, I also have written lots of blogs about my experience as a black person in China and across Asia actually. Alien Adventure, Black Girl Problems in Tibet, that's the blog that I've linked below that gives you a little taste of what it was like to be me in China. I'll be writing many more, and if you've got any other questions, or if I have just babbled in this video and haven't answered any questions that you may have had, just get in touch. I want to hear your comments. Let me know, and it will give me more food for thought for upcoming videos and blogs. Anyway, if you like this video, give this video some love. I invite you to like, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and check out the blog. And I'll see you next time. Take care.